Okay, I think it's coming on. And I've also found out that there's subtitles, so that may allow. I think you can actually download the subtitles only, which gives us a written text of the call.
That's pretty cool.
And that, yes, the recording is done actually on Skype server,
Oh,
which
okay.
means that all the processing power to do that does not take away from the user's laptop. In all of the other software that I know of, it really slows down
Yeah,
the
yeah.
computer.
I know what
But
you mean.
this is really good.
Mhm.
Um, so anyway, if you don't mind starting over with your description so that we can get into that.
Yeah. So I've been practicing for a little over 2 years now. And I can genuinely say I've been at the same spot for probably 90% of that. We've shared many conversations. I've done lots of reading. I've tried to stay patient, and I really do feel like I've put in a genuine effort without trying to over strive to achieve some goal. Um, and I've almost reached this point where I'm tired of fighting it, and I've almost kind of accepted that this is where I'm at. And there's some peace in that, but at the same time, it's a little. I can't help but feel a little bit frustrated. So that's kind of where I'm at.
All right. Can you describe what it is that's missing?
If I knew that, I'd probably be doing a lot better. But I don't know. I do a lot of reading on forums, like the Reddit subreddit Stream Entry and the Mind Illuminated subreddit and the various ones that have to deal with meditation. But I just read a lot of things on there, and I try to take tidbits here and there. But at the end of the day, people seem to like really make progress in weeks. But for me, like I've been at the same spot for well over a year and a half. So like for me to hear someone making progress in weeks, I'm like, oh, well, that's great for them. But to me, that just seems astronomical. Like I don't know what that feels like.
Uh-huh. Well, in that regard, based upon what we were talking about before we turned the recorder on, we were talking about the kind of pride that compares ourselves with others, and
Mm-hmm.
you're reading all of this stuff on the stream
Of
entry.
course.
You're comparing yourself to it, and instead of finding pride, you're finding jealousy. You're
Oh, for
finding
sure.
victim. You're
Yeah.
finding stuff that they have that you don't have.
Yeah.
Okay, that mentality that you've got there is the ordinary mentality that you've always had.
Yeah.
And so you're bringing old, the Jesus says, don't put new wine in old wineskins. Do you know why that's true?
Not really.
All right, it has to do with when you put the new wine in the goat gut bag, that the goat gut bag begins to harden a little bit. And if you put wine in it a second time, that new wine will start to crack the bag.
I see. Okay.
All right. So, where we're actually going with this is that you're mixing some old stuff with some new stuff. And it's showing signs of cracking and aging there. All right. So, here's what we need to do instead. The first thing to look at is to recognize that progress, real progress, is when there's satisfaction with progress. And when you're dissatisfied with your progress and wanting more, that means you're not making any progress. All right, now that's very, very significant, which means all you really need to do is to change your attitude. Just a slight attitude adjustment.
Do you mind if
To
I
cha-
say something really quick?
yeah, let me at least
Yeah.
finish the sentence,
Sure.
okay? That's the change of the attitude that is necessary, that brings you from the victim's position into the winner's position. That's the attitude change. Now, this attitude is actually part of the Eightfold Noble Path, the right noble view, right noble reminder or sati, and right noble effort gives then the fourth one, which is right noble attitude. And that right noble attitude then is, I can do it. It's a can do kind of attitude. Now go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. So I really only have those feelings. I try to approach it because I try to be cognizant of that, because we've touched on that a little bit in the past, and I try to really make an effort to just be with my sit and not have comparative feelings or try to over strive or try to get something necessarily out of it, to where I will feel good about myself and I can stroke my ego because I've made some progress. I try to just really sit down and just be there present with whatever task I'm dealing with at the time. But for me, it's just a matter of like constant, like inability to just not mind wander. So I can have stretches of about a minute or two.
So here's that attitude change. Instead of being unsatisfied with your progress because you continue to see the mind wander away, we need to change it to the perspective of seeing that when you do see the mind wander away, that is worthy of congratulations.
Mm-hmm.
To be happy with the fact that you can see it,
Mm-hmm.
that you're not permanently stuck in hindrance.
Right.
All right. That's the important thing, is to recognize that you too can come out of it. That in fact, the very first noble step that the Buddha talks about, step one of the Sotapan, is the, let us call it the knowledge that no matter how much the mind gets distracted, no matter how obstructed the mind is, you can, in fact, with remembering, you can say, okay, sati has come. Now let's take the effort to throw that stuff out and think of something wholesome. We have the right attitude, or not the right attitude in this case, but the right view that it is better and more wholesome and more satisfactory to watch the mind than to let the mind wander around. So that's the basis that we've started with. So we've got the right view. We've recognized the mind has wandered away. We're going to now take the effort to clean the mind out, to come back to the present moment, to no longer think about what I was thinking about a moment ago. And by doing that, we now have right attitude. And that attitude is a can-do attitude. It is a positive attitude. Now, going back to the way that the Buddha would talk about it, and he actually mentions this in the Anapanasati Sutta. And there is a Pali term called idia or idiyapada. The word pada in this case is like a base or a foundation. You can see the word pedal or pedestal in that word pada. All right, so idiyapada means the base of power. Now, in Buddhist religion and in Hinduism, Idia or the cities are normally referred to and thought of as magical powers. But within the context of the Anapanasati practice that we're doing here, that power is a different kind of power. It's actually a power over how you feel. And so some of the words in the dictionary that describe these powers is one of the words that's used, was kind of weird, is the word wealthy. All right, wealthy means that you've got an overabundance of everything that you need. Now, normally in the West, we use the word wealthy in the sense of how much money, rich, etc., like that. But we're not looking at it like that. We're looking at it in the sense of a wealth of good feelings, a wealth of um, uh, it has quality of generosity. It has the quality of being satisfied. And in fact, another word that's used in Idiopata is satisfaction, success. Another way of looking at it is feeling safe, feeling secure, as opposed to feeling vulnerable. The victims feel vulnerable. Lions don't feel vulnerable. They feel successful. All right. And so, in fact, if you think about it like this, the most important step, if you can think of it as important, at least for the student for a long period of time, the most important aspect of the Eightfold Noble Path is to gain the right attitude. And that right attitude is to coming out of the wrong attitude of being victim, of being victimized by other people, victimized by our feelings, victimized by the wandering mind, etc., like that, into the attitude of, hey, I can do this. Hey, this feels really good.
Mm-hmm.
I feel successful. All right. So that's that change of attitude is exactly what you're missing now.
Yeah.
Now, one of the ways that we hear about it um, is Christians talk about this. Um, and that they've got a kind of a funny little story about it, and they call it like a God-shaped hole. They've
Okay.
got a hole inside. They're empty. They
Yeah.
don't have enough. They feel
Yeah.
dissatisfied. They're
Mm.
not secure. They're not wealthy. They're not satisfied. They don't feel safe. They
Mm.
feel empty inside. Now, Buddha actually uses that quality of that emptiness and say, yeah, wow, after I clean all the crap out of the mind, there's emptiness left. Let's enjoy that emptiness. We don't need a to make it God shaped, or worse than that, make a God is in the shape of my hole and
Right.
plug him in there. But the Christians are using that in the sense that most people who are not aware of their hole shaped God, they try to throw all other things, bicycles, university degrees, houses, girlfriends, trophy girlfriends, all of that kind of stuff we try to throw into that hole to try to make us feel whole. Different, a homonym. All right. So we're trying to fill a hole, HOLE, in order to feel whole with a
Mm-hmm.
WH. And that this is almost always a failure
Yeah.
because it really is a matter of attitude change. And so, if you can experience that hole inside as an actual sensation of the body, it oftentimes is also referred to as anxiety or
Yeah.
stress or tension or whatever like that. And if you can experience it in the body, then the thing to do is to find a way of what we call breathing into it, to fill that with your breath and to fill up. This is one of the reasons why we actually do some breath control. I've seen it very interesting that those students who have been reading books from teachers in Sri Lanka, that the Sri Lankan teachers say, don't control your breath. But they're talking about something else completely.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are meditations that are more Hindu like, where the breath control is actually quite severe. And so when the Westerners here don't control the breath, they think, oh, don't control it at all. Well, you have to control it if you're going to make it conscious.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to do that. All right. It's like this. Imagine an automatic pilot that's on a commercial aircraft. That automatic pilot is basically nothing but a gyroscope and a few extra bells and whistles, but it's mechanical. It's not a huge, sophisticated AI computer. And all it can do is keep a heading and keep an altitude, and it uses a gyroscope to do that. And it makes the life of the pilot quite easy, except that the automatic pilot will take you right into turbulence.
Uh-huh.
It'll fly you into other aircraft if they're in the vicinity. It'll fly you into a mountain if it wasn't set up correctly. All right? All kinds of problems with the automatic pilot, and it certainly cannot take off and land a plane. Not yet. We need real AI to do that kind of stuff. So what that means is that if the pilot is not doing his job when he needs to, the very most likely thing is a lot of turbulence. But if the actual captain takes control of the aircraft and flies it himself, now he's responsible for the altitude, the attitude, the direction, the pitch, the yaw, the power, everything. He's got to do it. All right? It's either one or the other. So in that regard, that either we're going to let the breath go back to automatic pilot, or we're actually going to have to take control of it and do something with it ourselves. And in that regard, we can do a lot of stuff. One of the things that we can do, in fact, is take a really deep breath and kind of fill that hole up and break that energy up. By doing so, we also know that that by breathing in and breathing out, very shallow, that the body doesn't exchange much. It doesn't get much air in, and it doesn't get rid of a lot of carbon dioxide. And there's also in the blood other very small particles that are in the blood, like the breakdown of amino acids. Proteins break down into a particular molecule and an amino acid relationship. Those tiny molecules then will move through the capillaries of the blood into the breath. So if somebody is not breathing very well, that means there's not a lot of exchange, and the blood gets dirty. But if we take good, strong, deep breaths, we're actually cleaning the blood as well as ridding the body of excess carbon dioxide. And more importantly, and best of all, is we're bringing a lot of oxygen in. And that, in fact, will go directly to the frontal cortex in that, because when we're thinking about breathing, that breath actually, when we're not thinking about breathing, it's controlled by the part of the brain that is right close to the brainstem, back in the area where the heartbeat is controlled. But if we think about breathing, now the frontal cortex starts to light up.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually exercising the human part of the mind. That's another way of looking at what the real practice is to stop being on automatic pilot, or stop being a reptile and start being human.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually what will happen is that the human part of the mind is being well exercised and is in really fit for work. It actually takes over and becomes more responsible for the part of the brain that would automatically do things on automatic pilot, out of our instinct. All right, we instinctually do things, or we can do them wisely, our choice. And that's what Anapanasati is all about. Okay, so now we need to bring one more thing out of the automatic pilot and into the conscious part, and that's that attitude change that you're talking about. that in fact the way to read Reddit is with a red pen marking all of the mistakes that all of the other students are saying, especially when they're bragging.
Right.
Okay, that you're the winner, you're the lion, you're the one who knows what's going on. You're not the victim anymore.
Gotcha.
That's the major change that you need to make, and in doing so, you're actually exercising that part of the brain that then will bring that power, that idiopata, that feeling of wealth, that feeling of success, that feeling of power, that feeling of safety, security, satisfaction. They all seem to start with the letter S.
Yeah, really.
Okay, even the Hindus changed it from idia to city. Same word. So that's the way that we want to do it, and we can do it with every breath. Whenever the mind wanders away, in fact, that's the time to put this power in force. In the sense of, instead of, oh, the mind wandered away again, we can say, aha, I caught you, mind. Come back here. We're going to do some stuff right now. You're not going to play in the past anymore. Oh, you naughty child. Okay. So in that regard also, you're beginning to have more compassion for yourself.
Right.
Your view is that the mind really is difficult to control, and you're doing it. So you need to congratulate yourself for that. Rather than seeing how out of control it is, we begin to watch that, in fact, we can be successful anyway. That's the way of looking at it. So let's go back and review that point about, even in the very beginning, the Eightfold Noble Path needs to be practiced right from the get-go. And even though there are 8 points of the Noble Path, it winds up being 10 when we add knowledge and deliverance. But the Buddha talks about it in the following way. He says that he's going to, in the Sutta number 117, that he's going to teach right, noble concentration with its supports and requisites. Now, first off, let's look at that word concentration, because the Pali word for it is samadhi, and that the word samadhi does not have the same meaning as we use with concentration, that in fact the word samadhi has as much range of definitions as the word concentration when we use the word in its fullest extent. For instance, tang is concentrated orange juice. Take the water out, all right? You see what we're talking about. But we normally, when we think of right noble concentration, we're missing the point, because we're thinking about jhanas, we're thinking about a tight, focused, really deep, almost like a tang.
Yeah.
Because we've taken all of the other stuff out of it. But the real right noble concentration is better understood to mean unification of mind. When the student is no longer entertaining the things in the mind that keep the mind scattered. For instance, doubt. Doubt will keep the mind scattered. Is it A or is it B, or is it something else? But when we have full-on knowledge, then the mind becomes unified. Another would be lying. That if we tell a lie to someone, then that means that we are experience a conflict of interest. And that conflict of interest then is going to keep the mind from becoming unified. So the whole point about the Eightfold Noble Path is to have the mind come to a state of unity. All right. Now, there's various ways of looking at that, but one of the ways that you could look at it is also purity of mind. When the mind becomes pure. Well, another way of looking at the mind is, when it's pure, is simply free from hindrances. How pure does the mind need to get? Free from hindrances, and it's free. It's pure. that in fact is spoken of like that in Sutta number 24, that the first step on the path in that sutta is sila, and then it goes to samadhi, and then panya. Sila, samadhi, panya in this text means that when the student goes into seclusion, when he goes into his place and sits down and practices meditation, he's not harming anyone. He's not looking up any skirts from any girl's dresses. He's not thinking about how bad he hates his most enemy or stuff like that. In fact, what's going on is that he becomes secluded in his mind from all of the stuff in the outside world, and that is about the best you can do towards morality. Is being completely secluded from everything. That's the highest moral standard that you can get. So that's the sila. And so we go into seclusion so we can start to work on getting all of the crap out of the mind. And when we do, now the mind is in a state of purity. And this is the point about samadhi. Once we get that samadhi, or have the mind, in Bhikkhu Buddhadasa's language, he calls it having the mind fit for work. It's very easy to see by looking at the definitions and things that this is also what the Buddha calls first jhana, because the mind is, in fact, free from hindrances and it is fit for work. And then the next thing that we do is have purification of view. All right, now we're getting into real right view. Now we're really on the path, okay? But in order to get on that really noble path, we actually have to start practicing the path in the beginning, which means our first right view is that it is better to be free from hindrances. That's one's first right view. So that we also have right sati, to remember, and then one's right effort. Now, in the beginning, one's right effort sometimes takes a lot of effort. An example of that for you was when you felt inadequate. Even though you were able to do the meditation, you couldn't take that extra effort to bring it into the right attitude.
Yeah.
But once you start working and get your effort up, which means to exercise that mental muscle, exercising it for sati, exercising it for right effort, it actually gives energy. So your effort becomes energetic. Okay, just like someone who has never done a particular sport and he feels weak, and so he has to take effort to exercise, but once he does, now he's hopping around because he's got so his effort now has turned into energy. That's when it's really successful, and that's when it becomes an enlightenment factor. So it's very interesting that the Eightfold Noble Path and the 7 factors of enlightenment work together hand in hand, exactly so. So that one's right mindfulness in the beginning in sati, when it's fully developed as unremitting mindfulness, and that doesn't mean it's there all the time, it means it keeps coming back and coming back and coming back, then it's an enlightenment factor. Also, one's right view, when through investigation, when we're constantly investigating and constantly looking and constantly noticing, that investigation becomes one's noble right view. Also, one's right effort, when it is unremitting right effort, it becomes energy. And when your attitude about your practice and the attitude becomes successful, then you have what they call piti, or pleasure, that it's very pleasurable to feel that way. So you can see, in fact, these 4 aspects of the Eightfold Noble Path are actually become enlightenment factors when they become unremitting. And that's really, because now we're beginning to see, all of this stuff is so together so well, it makes everything so easy to see it. Okay, so these are the 4 factors of the path that eventually lead. Now, when we get off the cushion, now we have to start dealing with right effort, right action, uh, right speech and right livelihood, and we'll talk about those at a later time. But those we practice while we're off the cushion. But all the other stuff, including the unification of the mind, or the coming together of your path and your mindset into one, is one's right noble concentration, which is actually just, you're now just one person. You are not a crowd inside.
Got it.
And you can recognize that everybody that you know is a crowd inside, and they don't know who they are. A really, really good example, by the way, of this is a movie, and the name of the movie is Kung Fu Panda #3. Kung Fu
Really?
Panda Oh yeah, the whole sequence of the. Pardon?
I've seen the first one, not the other two, though.
Okay, well, the first one is when the panda bear starts practice, because the chipmunk, or whoever his teacher is, does it with food. Right? And so half the movie is playing with food, and it's the training that the panda goes through. And the food comes from his dad, who is a noodle vendor, who is a duck.
The bird,
right.
yeah.
All right. So by the second one, he's actually now a kung fu master. In the third movie, what happens is that he has an identity crisis. The identity crisis is when his actual panda father shows up on the scene. And he happens to be he's not a kung fu panda master. He's a panda master. And one of the things that he teaches his son is how to sigh. I think that's the best part of the movie. He's teaching him anapanasati. It's just amazing. Whoever wrote the script for this movie really knew what they were doing. Okay. So later in the movie, what happens is he has this identity crisis, because now he doesn't know, is he panda son of a noodle vendor? Is he a kung fu master? Is he the dragon master? Is he the panda, the son of a panda? He doesn't know who he is.
That is fun. Okay.
What really is what is going on is he's none of those things all the time, and he's only one of those things one at a time. And yet we have the identity that who we are is one thing, where in fact we're always scatterbrained. Every human being, just like the Kung Fu Panda brain, he's scatterbrained. He doesn't know who he is, because we think that what I am now is who I am always, and that's not the case. That every human being is a moving target.
Right.
Everybody's a moving target, and therefore we don't know who we are, because by the time we can figure out who we are, we're already moved for something else.
Right.
So that's what that Kung Fu Panda had to do. He had to come to that state of the unification of mind, is to recognize I'm not any of those things. They don't define who I am. So doctor, lawyer, policeman, Indian chief, preacher, all the labels that we can put on ourselves do not define who we are. But who we are defined will eventually come to your knowledge because of the practice of the Eightfold Noble Path. That this unification of mind is part of that, and that's what you're working on. And so anytime that you are reading Reddit and comparing yourself to others, what you're doing is that you're inviting yourself to bust up your own mind, to become scatterbrained again, by comparing yourself to others. So start watching how you do that, how you're comparing yourself to other people.
Yeah.
Because it always winds up making you miserable.
It really does.
And you're unique. You're incomparable.
Okay. Well, I need to head to bed because I gotta get up for work. But yeah, I'll work on that. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah. All right. I'll call you soon. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Excellent. We'll see you.
All right. Talk soon.